I want to start with the bracelet, because the bracelet is what changed everything from an ordinary suspicion into something I could not explain away. My name is Renata. I am 40 years old. I had been married to Solomon for 9 years, and for the last 14 months I had been living with the specific unease of a woman who knows something is wrong and cannot yet prove it. Not drama unease. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in the back of your chest while you go to work and make dinner and have ordinary conversations with the man lying beside you in bed. Solomon was a senior partner at a consulting firm. The dinner was a client appreciation event he had mentioned twice in passing, both times in the tone of a man who wanted the information to exist in my awareness without inviting follow-up questions. A private dining room. Important clients. He would be home by 11. My friend Celestine had been at the same restaurant with her husband for an anniversary dinner when she called me. "Renata," she said, "I'm going to describe something to me and I need you to tell me if I'm wrong." I already knew from her voice that she was not wrong. She described a woman at a large round table in the private dining room visible from her seat. Dark hair. A fitted dress. And on her left wrist, a gold and garnet bracelet with a small oval clasp engraved with the letter M. My mother's name was Miriam. She had left me that bracelet when she died 6 years ago. It was the only piece of her jewelry I had kept. I had worn it every day for 3 years and then, 2 years ago, I had noticed it was missing from my jewelry box and had told myself I had misplaced it somewhere and spent 18 months looking. It had not been misplaced. "I'm on my way," I said. Celestine said, "What are you going to do?" I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. "I'm going to sit down," I said. "And I'm going to let the evening happen." I checked my hair in the bathroom mirror. I put on the earrings I kept in my work bag for occasions that required them. I called a car. I was calm. I was completely, terrifyingly calm. Before I tell you what I walked into, I need to tell you what I had been living in for the last 14 months, and before that, what I had been building for the 9 years before those 14 months arrived. Solomon Adeyemi was 44 years old, Nigerian American, brilliant, the specific kind of charming that operates through making every person in the room feel they are his primary focus, while he is actually managing the room as a whole. He had been exactly this way when I met him at 31, and it had been, for the first 7 years, one of his most compelling qualities. It had taken me 2 more years to understand that managing rooms and being genuinely present in a room are different skills, and that he had only ever developed the first. I was a creative director at a branding agency. I had built my own client portfolio over 12 years. I had a professional reputation that was entirely mine, which mattered more than I had always acknowledged, because in our marriage Solomon had always been the visible success story, and I had always been the capable woman beside him who made things run. The things I had made run, our household, our social calendar, the dinner parties that his clients had come to expect as part of the Solomon Adeyemi experience. I had planned those dinners. I had chosen the wines. I had maintained the relationships that he called his relationships. 14 months ago, the specific quality of his attention had shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. The phone that had never been a secret became private. The evenings that had always been accounted for developed gaps. The warmth in his face when he looked at me, which had been real, I believe it was real for a long time, became performed. I had not confronted him. Not because I was afraid and not because I lacked evidence. Because I was a woman who understood that the confrontation you have before you are ready is the confrontation that serves the other person's timeline rather than your own. I had been getting ready. And then Celestine called. And the bracelet moved the timeline up. Are you enjoying the story so far? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because trust me, there's a lot more story to be told. Without wasting much time, let's continue. The restaurant was the kind of place where the lighting was specific, warm and low, and designed to make everyone look like a better version of themselves. I had been here twice before, both times with Solomon for client dinners I had helped him prepare for. The host at the front was a young man who smiled with the professional warmth of someone whose job requires it. "I'm joining the Adeyemi party," I said. "Private dining room." He checked the reservation list. His expression registered something, not quite uncertainty, something more careful than that. "Of course," he said. "Right this way." I followed him through the main dining room. Celestine's table was to the right. I did not look at her, but I felt her eyes on me, the specific attentiveness of a woman who has called her best friend into a situation and is now watching what happens. The private dining room was through a heavy wood door. The host opened it. 12 people at a round table. Warm light. The smell of good food and expensive wine. Solomon at the far side of the table, mid-sentence, with the specific ease of a man who is in his most comfortable element. He saw me. The sentence he had been forming stopped somewhere in his throat. I had prepared for his face. What I had not fully prepared for was seeing the bracelet in full, the gold catching the warm light, the garnet deep red against the woman's wrist, the oval clasp with the engraved M facing me across the table as clearly as a statement. She was sitting 2 seats to Solomon's left. Her name, I would learn, was Isabelle Laurent, 36, French Cameroonian, a junior associate at a firm that was one of Solomon's clients. She had the specific poise of someone who had been brought to this dinner as more than a professional guest and who understood her role in this room. She did not yet understand that I had just walked into it. I smiled at the table. "I'm so sorry I'm late," I said. The traffic was impossible. And I sat down in the empty chair between 2 clients who did not know what they were witnessing. Here is what I want you to understand about the next 2 hours. I did not cause a scene. I did not accuse anyone. I did not cry or tremble or give Solomon the specific gift of a public meltdown he could later use to frame the narrative of what had happened between us. I was present. Warmly, completely, strategically present. I introduced myself to the clients I had not met, and there were 2 I had not met, which told me Solomon had been building this client group separately from the dinner parties I managed, which was its own form of information. I asked questions about their businesses. I remembered details from earlier in the conversation and referenced them later. I was, as I had always been at Solomon's professional events, exceptional. Solomon watched me do this with the expression of a man standing on ice he cannot test and cannot leave. The woman with the bracelet, Isabelle, was quiet for the first 20 minutes. She had the composure of someone recalibrating quickly, which told me she was intelligent. She understood that something had changed when I walked through the door, and she was not going to compound it by behaving in a way that drew attention. At the 30-minute mark, the client to my left, a man named Arthur who ran a logistics company and who had the easy warmth of someone genuinely enjoying his evening, said to me, "Solomon never mentioned you'd be joining us." What a wonderful surprise. He didn't know I was coming, I said warmly. I finished a client presentation earlier than expected and thought I'd surprise him. I looked at Solomon when I said it. His jaw was set in the specific way of a man containing something very large in a room that does not permit its release. "Wonderful," Arthur said. At the 60-minute mark, Isabelle reached for her wine glass and the movement shifted the bracelet on her wrist. The garnet caught the light. I looked at it directly. I let myself look at it the way you look at something that belongs to you that is on someone else's arm, and then I looked back at Arthur and continued the conversation we had been having. I did not look at Solomon. I did not need to. At the 90-minute mark, something happened that I had not planned, but that I understood immediately was the moment the evening had been building toward. The client across from me, a woman named Patricia who ran a medical supply company and who had, over the course of the dinner, become the most engaged person at the table, noticed the bracelet on Isabelle's wrist during a moment when Isabelle reached for the bread basket. "That is a beautiful bracelet," Patricia said, with the genuine appreciation of a woman who notices beautiful things. Isabelle said, "Thank you. It was a gift." The table had several conversations running simultaneously. I was watching Patricia. I was watching Isabelle. I was not watching Solomon, but I could feel him watching me. Patricia looked at the bracelet with the specific attention of a woman examining a beautiful thing. "The engraving on the clasp," she said. "Is that a letter M?" "Yes," Isabelle said. A slight hesitation. "It was my mother's." I set my wine glass down. Calmly. Deliberately. I looked at Isabelle. "What a lovely thing to say about it," I said. "My mother left me a bracelet very similar to that one when she passed. Gold and garnet, oval clasp, engraved with her initial. I wore it every day for 3 years." I paused. "I've been looking for it for about 18 months. I couldn't imagine where it had gone." The table continued its other conversations. Patricia looked at me. Isabel looked at me. And across the table, Solomon went very still in the specific way of a man who has just understood the full shape of what is happening. How strange, Patricia said carefully. Yes, I said. I picked up my wine glass again and smiled at Arthur. It really is the most peculiar thing. But I'm sure it will turn up. I changed the subject. I did not look at Solomon. The ice beneath him had become something else entirely. Let me tell you what I had been doing in the 14 months before the bracelet. Because the poise at that dinner table was not accidental. The composure was not natural. It was built the same way I had built everything in my professional life, through deliberate preparation and the specific patience of a woman who has decided to act correctly rather than immediately. 6 months after the unease began, I had retained an attorney named Mirabel Osei, 49, Ghanaian American. With 22 years of family law and the specific bearing of a woman who had seen every variety of marital dissolution and had developed a permanent immunity to being surprised. She had 2 pieces of advice that I had followed exactly. First, document everything. Financial records, account statements, property holdings, and any evidence of the changed behavior pattern. I had maintained a private log for 8 months. Second, do not move until the documentation is complete. I had not moved. I had maintained. I had gone to work and made dinner and attended Solomon's professional events and been the capable woman beside him who made things run, while quietly, on a second laptop he did not know existed, I had been building the case that Mirabel called the most thorough she had seen in her practice. I had also discovered, through the financial records I had access to as a co-signer on several accounts, that Solomon had been making payments to a credit card I was not named on. The total over 14 months was significant. Some of those payments had gone, Mirabel's forensic accountant had determined, toward gifts. Jewelry, specifically. My mother's bracelet had not been purchased for Isabel. It had been taken from my jewelry box and given to her. Which was different. Which was worse. Which was the specific cruelty of a man who thought he was invisible. I sat at that dinner table with 8 months of documentation, a forensic accountant's report, and Mirabel on call, and I smiled at Arthur and discussed the logistics industry and let Solomon watch me be completely composed. I had been ready for a while. I had simply been waiting for the right room. The evening ended at 10:15. The clients said their goodbyes with the warmth of people who had enjoyed themselves. Arthur shook my hand and said Solomon was lucky to have such a remarkable wife, which was delivered without irony and landed with a specific weight on the man beside me. Isabel left before the end. She made her excuses at 9:45 and left with the composed efficiency of a woman who has assessed a situation accurately and understood that remaining was not in her interest. She did not look at me when she left. She looked at Solomon once, a brief, communicative look that told me everything about the nature of their arrangement, and then she was gone. The bracelet left with her. I noted this. I said nothing. When the last client had said goodnight and the private dining room was empty except for Solomon and me and the remnants of an expensive dinner, Solomon said. How did you know? Celestine was here, I said. Anniversary dinner. A long silence. Renata. I'm going to say one thing tonight, I said. And then we're going home, and I'm going to sleep, and we will have the full conversation tomorrow when Mirabel is available. His face shifted. Mirabel. Mirabel Osei, I said. My attorney. She's been my attorney for 8 months. The color changed in his face in the specific way it changes when someone understands they have been operating under a set of assumptions that were never accurate. 8 months, he said. 8 months, I said. The documentation is thorough. The forensic accountant's report is complete. The timeline is documented. The credit card records are included. I stood up from the table. What I want to say tonight is this. That bracelet belonged to my mother. It was in my jewelry box. You took it and gave it to her. Of everything you have done, and I know more of what you have done than you believe, that is the thing that I am going to carry the longest. He said nothing. I picked up my bag. I'll see you at home, I said. Sleep in the guest room. I called Mirabel at 11 p.m. from the car. She had told me, 8 months ago when I first retained her, that I could call at any hour if the situation changed significantly. It moved tonight, I said. Tell me, she said. I told her everything. The restaurant, the bracelet, the dinner, Isabel's departure, the conversation with Solomon in the empty room. She was quiet for a moment. You told him about me, she said. I wanted him to understand the timeline, I said. I wanted him to know that what he thought was happening, which was that he had time to manage this on his own terms, was not what was actually happening. Good, she said. How do you feel? I thought about it honestly. Like someone who has been holding something very heavy for a long time, I said, and has just set it down in the right place. Good, she said again. I'm filing the papers Monday morning. I've been ready for 6 weeks. The bracelet, I said. Can we? The bracelet is documented in the financial records as a taken personal item, she said. The fact that he took something from your jewelry box rather than purchasing a new gift actually strengthens the case. It establishes a pattern of entitlement to your personal property. She paused. We are going to be very thorough about what is yours, Renata. I know, I said. Is he going to contest? He'll try, I said. He is a man who has always believed he can manage any situation by being charming enough and moving fast enough. He is going to discover that this situation was managed before he started. It was, she said. Get some sleep. I went home. Solomon was in the guest room with the door closed. The house was quiet in the specific way it gets when two people are in it and the thing between them has finally been named. I went to my room. I took off the earrings I had put on in the car on the way to the restaurant. I slept. The divorce took 7 months. Solomon contested, as I had predicted, not because he believed he could win the significant arguments, but because he was a man who needed to feel he had fought, which Mirabelle had also predicted and had structured the case to accommodate. Every position he took, she had anticipated. Every document his attorney requested, we had already organized and labeled. The financial settlement reflected 9 years of what Mirabelle called the invisible contribution, the dinner parties I had planned and executed, the client relationships I had maintained, the professional reputation that had benefited from my consistent presence as his partner. The forensic accountant's report had been meticulous. The settlement reflected it. The bracelet was returned in month 3, not through legal action, which Mirabelle had prepared for, but through a courier delivery that arrived at my office on a Tuesday. It came in a small jewelry box with no note. I opened the box and looked at it for a long time. Then I put it on my left wrist where it belonged and called my friend Celestine. It's back, I said. She was quiet for a moment. How does it feel? She said. Like my mother, I said. Which is exactly what it's supposed to feel like. Arthur from the dinner called me 6 weeks after the filing became public. He had heard through the industry grapevine, which moves quickly in consulting circles. He said he wanted to say that the evening had clearly been more complicated than he had understood, and that he hoped I was well. I told him I was more than well. He asked if I had considered consulting clients independently. I had. We had coffee. Arthur became my first independent consulting client. I want to be clear about something. I did not go to that dinner looking for justice. I went because Celestine called and because my mother's bracelet was on another woman's wrist and because I was a woman who had been preparing for 8 months and had simply been waiting for the right room. The room found me. Here is what I kept from 9 years of marriage, stated plainly because plainness is what this ending deserves. The financial settlement was fair, accurate, as Mirabelle had said it would be, rather than punitive. I did not want to destroy Solomon. I wanted what was mine, valued correctly, returned completely. That is what I received. I kept the apartment, not the marital home, which we sold, but a new apartment I chose myself with the specific attention of a woman selecting the environment of the next version of her life. It faces east. The morning light comes through the main room. I have been here 8 months and I have filled it with things that are entirely mine. The bracelet is on my left wrist. It has not left my wrist since it was returned. I am not going to let it leave my wrist again. My independent consulting practice launched 4 months after the divorce finalized. Arthur was the first client. By the end of the first year, I had 9 clients and a waiting list. The professional identity that had spent 9 years being adjacent to Solomon's career is now entirely, unmistakably my own. Celestine and I have dinner every other Thursday. She does not say, "I told you so." She is that kind of friend. Mirabelle sent me flowers when the divorce finalized. A card that said, "You built this correctly. All of it." I kept the card. Solomon is still at his firm. I hear things occasionally through professional channels and receive them with the specific blankness I reserve for information that is no longer relevant to my life. Isabelle Laurent is apparently no longer in his life either, which I received with the same blankness. Whatever he does from here is his life to manage. I am occupied with mine. I am 40 years old. I sat at a dinner table with my mother's bracelet on another woman's wrist, and I did not cry. I did not accuse. I did not perform my pain for an audience. I introduced myself to the clients he had been keeping separate from me. I asked about their businesses. I made the remark about the bracelet that needed to be made. I let the evening do what the evening needed to do. And then I went home and I slept. Because the work had already been done. Moral: the woman who prepares before she responds does not need to raise her voice. The room will do the work for her. The end. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for watching. I hope it stayed with you and gave you something to think about. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of the journey. There's so much more story still to come.